Imagine you are living in a cave for all of your life, trapped in chains and facing a wall. All you could see would be some shadows that randomly appear on the wall in front of you. Suddenly, you are set free and turn around. What would you do next? Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Michael and you're watching Reading for a Living, your go-to place on YouTube for getting the core information from books that can change your lives. The most powerful and important people in society have at least one thing in common, and that is that they read a lot of books. If you would like to do that also, but feel that you don't have time to read, then at least subscribe to this channel and hit that notifications bell, because I'll be bringing you the key messages and information that books are trying to tell us by presenting you the summary of many must-read books from domains ranging from philosophy and personal development to marketing and money investments. So without further ado, let's start with the first book of this series, Platos Republic. This is one of the most important philosophy books that everyone should read. This book presents Socrates as the main character, having dialogues with other people from ancient Greece in Athens, and tries to explain two main things: what is justice and what is the best form of government for a city. Here's a fun fact: Socrates is one of the most known figures in philosophy, but has never written anything himself, and some people say he didn't even exist. In the first part of the Republic, there is a lot of dialogue about what is the definition of justice. Socrates receives some definitions from his fellow conversation partners, but only to prove that those definitions aren't correct. Socrates finally provides his own definition of what justice is, and it can be put as follows: everybody in society should do their job to the best of their abilities and according to their nature. Socrates says that every person should do only one job, the one they are best suited for, and not do the jobs of others. For example, the teacher should only be a teacher, the merchant only a merchant, and the warrior only a warrior. After defining justice, the conversation moves to building the just city. Socrates first shows how the functioning city would look like by making a city that only has citizens who engage in producing goods or services. But such a city would be weak because it would fall prey to external enemies, as it would not have anyone to protect it, since people producing goods couldn't go to war, as it would violate the principle of justice. And here is where the just city is formed, by introducing its protectors, called the guardians. This is the ideal city, which is formed from three classes of people: the ones building or creating things, called the producers, the army of the city, called the auxiliaries, and the leaders of the city, called the guardians. The guardians and the auxiliaries are sometimes referred to just as the guardians. They are an important class of people and are the only ones who get involved in politics. In order to be a guardian, one should have some character traits, should love knowledge and philosophy, should be strong and fast, should be highly educated, and should train to fight, but not for athletic purposes, but for actually going to war. Socrates makes a parallel between the soul of the individual and the soul of the city. He says that a man's soul has three parts: the rational, which is the part for thinking, the spirited, which is the part for emotions, and the appetitive part, which is for satisfying physiological needs. These three parts are attributed to the classes of people in the city, as the guardians being the rational part, the auxiliaries the spirited one, and the producers the appetitive one. These classes are strict, and switching between them wouldn't be possible, but this is not available for children. As for example, if kids that show guardian abilities are born in a producer family, they would be taken from that family and sent to school to become guardians. He also says that people should be told a noble lie, which is a cult-like story that everybody comes from the earth of the city and therefore they should love and protect the city. Here also we find a category of three metals that again represent the classes of people: the gold for the guardians, the silver for the auxiliaries, and iron and bronze for the producers. Education is a key factor in raising future guardians, and Socrates talks about the concept of telling stories to kids that are selected to become guardians. These stories should be heroic and should present the main character as courageous, honest, and not fearing death. The only fear that those heroes should have would be of enslavement. This way, when the time for war would come, the Guardians would fight heroic and to the death in order to avoid slavery for them and the city. Besides these stories, the Guardians would have a strange lifestyle, such as living together and having their spouses and kids held in common. This means nobody would know who their real kids are, and one person could have multiple spouses as they would exist for reproduction purposes. They should not own any private property and should not touch any silver or gold in order not to be tempted to enslave the producers and rule for their own benefit. By having everything in common, the city would be more united and everybody would feel they are part of a big family. Every need for housing, food or weapons would be provided for by the producers, and the Guardians wouldn't have to worry about these things as they would only be concerned with war and ruling. Another important thing to note here for that time of age is that women would have the same access to education as men, and they could also be guardians themselves. But how can these guardians be compelled to live such a strange life? Here is where the philosopher king comes into discussion. He is the best human raised from the Guardians and is presented as the man with the most balanced soul and the one who understands the forms. The forms aren't specifically defined in the Republic, but they represent the essences of truth, the absolute truth. Each form represents one absolute truth, such as the beautiful, the equal, the good, and so on. The philosopher king is a man who strives for truth with all of his being, and this means that his other two parts of the soul are weakened because his rational part dominates the spirited and appetitive one. Another key factor about him is that he would rule only from a moral obligation to the city and not from his own desires. He would prefer not to rule, but he understands that if he would do that, he would harm the city by not providing it with his abilities. So how does one become a philosopher king? Socrates says that through the study of mathematics and dialectic. The candidates would be selected since childhood as the most stable, courageous, graceful, interested in subjects in school, with the ability to learn easy and who have a great memory. They should also love hard work and have a potential for virtue. Kids will go through a whole training regimen of learning calculation and geometry. A key factor here is that they would be taught through play, so they understand faster and easier. Then they will go for 2 or 3 years of intense physical training. That training should be so intense that they wouldn't be able to do anything in those days as they would be too tired. After this, they will study dialectic until the age of 20 or so, then they would be sent to war or in politics. At the age of about 50, they will be able to become philosopher kings. At each stage of their education, the kids that can pass the stages become auxiliaries and the rest keep getting educated for becoming kings. The philosopher king would have to instill in the city the love for education and knowledge, but he would have a difficult task ahead. Here Socrates presents one of the most important allegories in philosophy, the allegory of the cave, which goes something like this. Imagine that there is a group of people held prisoners in a cave without any knowledge of the outside world. They are stuck in chains and the only thing that they see is the wall in front of them, on which from time to time appear all sorts of moving shadows. The prisoners give names to those shadows and think that they are seeing actual entities. They don't know that behind them there is a fire and people are passing in front of that fire holding different objects in hand. But let's say that in a turn of events, one of the prisoners escapes his chains and walks around the cave. He goes to that fire but has a real difficulty in looking at the light as his eyes are not adjusted. With time passing, his eyes adjust with the light and he can see the people with the objects. He soon discovers that the shadows that he thought were real entities actually come from the people and objects whenever they are passing next to that fire. And the shadows are mere reflections of the real objects. But let's say he is dragged out of the cave into the outside world. At first, again, his eyes would have problems adjusting to the light. But again, as time passes, he starts to see the outside world. He sees animals, people, and nature, and he even gazes at the sky. He sees animals, people, and nature, and he even gazes at the sky. He realizes that previously he had been looking merely at phantoms. Now he is nearer to the nature of being. Out of compassion for his fellow prisoners, he goes back to the cave to try and tell them about his new discoveries. When he goes back to the cave, he stumbles around and gets confused, as his eyes are now not adjusted to the dark. But finally, he reaches the prisoners. When he tells them about the sun, the nature, and other people, at first the prisoners think he is crazy and become sarcastic. Then, when he insists, they get angry and even plot to kill him. When he tells them about the sun, the nature, and other people, at first the prisoners think he's crazy and become sarcastic. Then, as he insists, they get angry and even plot to kill him. With this allegory, Socrates tries to point out how hard it is to be a philosopher and what the philosopher king would have to face. He is the freed prisoner who gets enlightened and out of compassion tries to enlighten others. Well, that was that about the philosopher king. In the Republic, Socrates also presents his top 5 of governing systems. He considers aristocracy as being the best form of government, and this is the one which was presented in the previous chapters of the book. He says that each system degenerates from the previous one from best to worst. And here's a quick quiz. Could you guess on what place democracy stood in Socrates' top 5? After aristocracy, which is the rule by the elites portrayed by the philosopher king, comes timocracy. Timocracy is when the spirited people get into power and is a system defined as the rule by honor. The next in line is oligarchy, which is the rule by money. People compete to make more money and the one with the most money buys his place into power. After oligarchy comes the system that we find in most countries today, democracy, which is the rule by the people. Socrates says that this system paves the way for the worst system of them all, called tyranny. By using all the freedoms of democracy, the tyrant gets into power and he starts ruling for his own benefit. So, Socrates defined what justice is and what is the best form of government, but he also talked about other things that you can find in the actual book. Anyways, this was the summary for Plato's Republic, and if you don't have time to read this book, at least you get some useful information about it. If somehow you would like to read this book, I left some links in the descriptions below on the places where you can find it. If you think I left some important things out of this summary, leave them in the comment section below, as I would love to know your opinion, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe, as it helps this channel. That's all for today guys, and see you next time.